A rusting vessel that once set sail to find a shipwreck full of gold.
It carried the greatest lost treasure in United States history.
A house of correction where the building itself dealt out punishment.
If you get your hand in there, when that 60,000 pounds come around there, it's gone.
And a huge forgotten complex that taught America how to laugh.
If it wasn't for them, the American entertainment scene might look very different today.
South of Jacksonville, on the St. Johns River, lies a collection of rusting and forgotten vessels.
Among this crowd of boats, there's this lonely old ship clinging to the side of one of the docks.
You can imagine it, in its prime, smashing through the waves in whatever nature could throw at it.
It once took a daring crew on a mission to find a hoard of lost gold.
It was the storybook treasure, no doubt about it.
But this story doesn't end at sea.
What happened when they made it back to shore is scarcely believable. It's the stuff of a Hollywood script.
The leader of the voyage would end up a fugitive, the focus of a nationwide manhunt.
The authorities actually started posting billboards with his face saying, "Have you seen this man? Come forward and let us know."
This has all the traits of a modern-day pirate story. You've got shipwrecks, hidden gold, and a man languishing in jail.
One of the crew members on this ship's speculative mission in 1988 was Bob Evans. His involvement in the project began when his neighbor, Tommy Thompson, offered him a job to locate a very special shipwreck.
What he really offered me was, can you research these areas of the ocean where we might find it? Tommy told me if he ever got it funded that I would get paid for those hours, and that was in fact the case.
The ship they all hoped to find was the SS Central America. After encountering a hurricane at sea, it sank in 1857 with the loss of 425 lives.
It was an extremely famous shipwreck at the time, comparable to the way that the Titanic became in the 20th century.
But the SS Central America carried more than just people.
The SS Central America was carrying an estimated 30,000 pounds of gold, all prospected during the California Gold Rush.
The ship was bound for New York with a cargo of gold worth approximately $2 million in its time, roughly $300 million in today's money. Exactly where the ship sunk, however, was a mystery.
Trying to find a ship lost during the mid-19th century in a part of the Atlantic Ocean over a mile deep was a long shot, to say the least.
This is the Arctic Discoverer, the ship that took on this impossible task. The team located this ship frozen in the ice of Newfoundland, retired after years working as a Canadian fisheries research vessel, called the Arctic Ranger.
This boat was perfect. It had 5 scientific laboratories built into it, and these could be used in the mission that lay ahead.
Thompson managed to convince 161 private investors to fund the expedition. And in June 1988, the renamed Arctic Discoverer set sail in an attempt to find the SS Central America and its golden cargo.
It was also equipped with an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, and this was critical because the treasure would be far too deep for divers to go down.
The crew affectionately named their remotely operated submersible Nemo.
Nemo was a remarkable vehicle. I liken it a bit to like one of NASA's Gemini program, where it was an amazing achievement at the time.
Bob had honed in on 2 areas off the coast of the Carolinas, where it was thought the hurricane-hit ship had fatefully drifted. In the summer of 1988, Nemo began relaying footage from the depths to the eagerly watching crew above.
This is the control room where it all happened. I sat at a small table here. Over here we had the co-pilot, his station and his monitor. Here was where the pilot sat with his monitor.
For months, they were staring at blank, lifeless scenes, but they refused to give up.
As they sent down their underwater robot for yet another search, something magical appeared on their computer screens.
Nemo swam over the SS Central America's paddle wheels, and this room erupted in joy and laughter upon seeing that.
You know what that is?
But the presence of the gold was still unconfirmed. They had to wait to develop the photos to be sure.
One of our photographic technicians, he told me, go in the photo lab and have a look at what's on the table. It was magnificent.
What they saw was beyond their wildest dreams. Piles of gold bars and gold coins.
Finding the gold was one thing. Getting it back to the surface was a completely different problem.
Retrieving the gold from over 7,000 feet below was also a task for the multi-talented Nemo. It had a mechanical arm that would scoop treasure into a small storage drawer. But the first attempt to pull Nemo back onto the ship didn't go as planned.
The crane with the swing mechanism on it broke. Nemo was wildly swinging from side to side, suspended above the deck here.
They eventually secured Nemo to the deck. The sub's hydraulics had broken, but crucially, the precious cargo it contained was safe.
4 of us pried open the drawer that was on Nemo and removed the gold and secured it downstairs inside my laboratory.
The damage to Nemo forced the crew to come ashore early, but crucially, they weren't returning empty-handed.
This we knew that we could use to secretly announce to our investment group that in fact we had found the treasure and that we were ready to go out and recover this treasure.
The following year, they returned to the shipwreck and retrieved over a ton of gold.
They returned to shore to great acclaim, media attention, news trucks, and armed guards. But almost immediately, everything went south.
In 1989, the Arctic Discoverer returned from sea carrying over a ton of gold recovered from the 1857 wreck of the SS Central America. But after the initial fanfare came controversy.
39 insurance companies came forward to claim that they were actually the owners of the gold because they had insured it back in the mid-19th century.
But as the salvagers, Tommy Thompson and his crew expected they had a rightful claim to most of the gold. It was down to a court to decide.
1992, the appellate decision came back saying that we, as the people who worked on recovering it, are entitled to a salvage award. This ultimately sorted its way out through years of litigation and lawsuits to the point where our group got essentially 92.5%.
In the year 2000, Tommy Thompson sold the treasure to a marketing group for a reported $50 million, who then oversaw its sale through various auctions. But allegedly, none of his investors in the expedition saw any proceeds. 2 companies who had invested large amounts of money filed a lawsuit.
A media circus built up. Some newspapers were calling Tommy a pirate who had gotten away with stolen booty.
After long legal delays, In 2012, Thompson was finally summoned to appear in court.
For reasons unknown, still to this day, he made a drastic decision that would shape the rest of his life.
He fled. He ran away from a federal district judge.
The police used huge electronic billboards to enlist the public's help to try to find Thompson. This was a proper manhunt.
Tommy Thompson evaded capture for 2 years.
One of the U.S. Marshals who was tasked with finding him said that he was one of the most intelligent fugitives ever sought.
He was apprehended in early 2015 in Boca Raton, Florida, and has been essentially incarcerated ever since.
Initially only given a 2-year prison sentence for criminal contempt, the judge later ordered that Thompson remain locked up until he revealed the location of hundreds of gold coins believed to still be in his possession.
As long as he talked about where the coins were, he could potentially be set free. But instead, he denies any knowledge of the coins, stating, "I feel like I don't have the keys to my freedom."
It's hard to know what the truth is here, but one fact still remains, and that is, he's still in prison.
I usually describe my feelings about my old friend Tommy Thompson as extreme ambivalence. I am thrilled that he got me involved. On the other hand, I hate like hell what has happened to him and the taint it has brought to what was otherwise a really magnificent story.
Bob returned to the SS Central America site in 2014 and helped a new crew find over 3,000 more gold coins. The Arctic Discoverer, caught up in all the legal issues of the first expedition, would never set sail again. Today, the Arctic Discoverer is beyond repair, but it still has a future.
The Arctic Discoverer may soon join the SS Central America at the bottom of the ocean, as there are talks for the storied ship to be sunk and turned into an artificial reef.
Whatever its fate, it will always be remembered for its pioneering voyage of discovery.
It was a cool idea to go to sea and hunt for treasure. I mean, how often does a human get an opportunity to actually do that? It was a great adventure.
In the Midwest, there's a forgotten facility with a twist, where residents' lives took a turn for the worse.
You drive down the street, you think this is a great big house. You have no idea what it is. And the people that were here, they really didn't know what they were getting into.
We're in Crawfordsville, about 50 miles west of Indianapolis, the capital city of the state of Indiana.
Downtown, a red brick building doesn't fit in.
This is weird. With its high windows and roof trims, this structure looks like nothing else around. It feels grand, yet when you get up close, you can see some of the walls are in a bad way.
Entering through the front door, nothing can prepare you for this. It's a world of metal cogs and bars.
This place once represented a groundbreaking American design, but it broke far more than just architectural standards.
The most incredible thing about this building is this big, amazing machine. We had amputated feet, amputated arms.
It's said that the terror of an event here inspired one of Hollywood's greatest hits.
In Crawfordsville, hundreds pass this building each day, not knowing the horrors hidden within. But for Philip Roach, it's a place close to his heart.
I feel peace when I come into this building. I feel like I'm at home.
When Philip first came here, this structure housed around 20 people.
I knew just about everybody that was in here at the time because most of them were from the neighborhood. I could come back here and learn how to play checkers, cheat at poker, and the good things in life.
While Philip entered voluntarily, everyone else came here against their will. This is the Montgomery County Jail.
The Montgomery County Jail mainly housed prisoners for 1 or 2 nights for minor misdemeanors. But it also housed the sheriff and his family.
My uncle, Roy Hardacre, was a sheriff in 1949 to 1951, and that's when I first entered this building.
Constructed in 1882, the Montgomery County Jail was a guinea pig for the American penal system. It was the first of only a handful of rotary jails built across the nation.
Rotary jails were built with spinning cell blocks. It was meant to be a cost-saving idea because each floor had only one exit and entrance, meaning fewer guards were needed.
Brittany Turpin has spent the last 10 years learning this building's treacherous secrets.
Right now we're standing underneath the jail. This is the railroad turntable that the cell block sits on.
The jail itself is made up of 16 wedge-shaped cells that are put together in a cylindrical block with 2 levels, 8 cells on each level. This is a place that was a carousel for convicts.
So this is the hand crank, and it turns both the first and second floor at the same time. When it was first built, it only took about 14 pounds of pressure for it to move.
Yet this custodial contraption had one major flaw, one that broke not just the will of the prisoners, but also their bones. Holding prisoners in a spinning cell block, the Rotary Jail in Crawfordsville, Indiana was a revolutionary design. But some of the people who were held here lost more than just their freedom.
When the guards were rotating the cells, sometimes the prisoners weren't ready, and their limbs would be dangling outside the bars.
The jail would rotate very, very quietly. The prisoners didn't know to remove their arms, and bad things could happen.
If you get your arm in there, when that 60,000 pounds come around there, it's gone.
With prisoners arrested for only minor misdemeanors like drunken disorderly conduct, losing their limbs while in prison wasn't acceptable. So in 1933, authorities stepped in and stopped this slammer from spinning.
When taking custody of a person, you are responsible for their well-being, and the Rotary Jail just wasn't the kind of place that you could keep people safe for very long. So the gears and mechanisms that made it move were eventually welded shut.
But amputated limbs were just the beginning of the horrors at the Montgomery County Jail.
In 1885, an inmate named John Coffey was sentenced to death by hanging.
He was accused of killing the farmers here.
It was well known that John suffered from intellectual disabilities and was considered very vulnerable. He was easily persuaded.
Whether John was guilty or not is still debated to this day. Yet while he was held here awaiting his execution, he formed an unlikely camaraderie.
The guards were aware of his vulnerabilities and that he was a good-natured man. They liked having him around, and they even warmed to him.
An example of that is that they knew John was afraid of the dark.
The first night that he stayed in the jail, he was distraught, he was scared, and we know that one of the guards stayed with him that night so that he wouldn't have to be alone.
Regardless of these friendships, on October 15th, 1885, John took center stage in Crawfordsville's first public execution, which took place in the courtyard here.
The county did sell tickets so the public could come and view the execution. There was approximately 250 people here.
Despite a sense of excitement in the crowd, no one was prepared for what would happen next.
The first 2 attempts to execute John failed each time the rope broke.
The accounts from the newspapers state that people were actually vomiting in the crowd, watching Coffey fall to the ground, get picked back up with blood coming out of his ears.
Yet this was only the start of the event that still haunts Crawfordsville to this day.
On the third attempt, the rope didn't break, but it also didn't tighten very hard around his neck. It meant that he had a very drawn-out execution.
It was a gruesome way to go. It didn't break his neck, it just choked him to death.
It took 9 minutes for John's heart to stop. It's impossible to imagine the horrors of watching this prolonged death rattle. But many claim it inspired one of America's greatest books and films, Stephen King's The Green Mile.
While Stephen King has never said that this story influenced The Green Mile, the similarities are striking.
The main character in The Green Mile was also called John Coffey, although spelt differently. They were both convicted of similar crimes, they both had learning difficulties, were afraid of the dark, and struck up relationships with their guards. Surely this is all more than just a coincidence.
Fortunately, throughout the 20th century, the horrors John Coffey faced here were never repeated. But in the 1970s, a peculiar pattern of arrests began to appear.
Prisoner numbers would shoot up, and they were way higher on the weekends than they were for neighboring towns.
Bizarrely, it turned out that some townsfolk were intentionally getting arrested.
This boost in the inmate population was all thanks to one woman, the jail's matron, Liz Scholl.
When Liz was serving as the matron in this facility, she did get the reputation of being an exceptionally good cook.
Married to the sheriff, Liz lived in the prison and treated the inmates like they were her extended family, often feeding them what her family were having for dinner.
Word spread around town that on Sunday, Liz would make fried chicken, and on Monday morning, she would have biscuits and gravy. Strangely, arrests shot up on Sundays.
Yet these culinary highs couldn't save the jail. Even while Liz worked here, authorities forced it to shut.
The jail closed in 1973 because the need for the inmates really outgrew the size of the facility.
It was antiquated. They just didn't have enough facilities to handle the prisoners.
Today, over half a century since it shut, the Montgomery County Jail has reopened as a museum.
I'm the executive director of the foundation that oversees the facility. We have approximately 4,000 visitors a year that come into the jail.
While being the only functional Rotary jail in America helps to draw in visitors, the highlight of many a visit is hearing the stories firsthand from Philip.
I still have a great time in here. I love giving the tours. This here is a step in the American penal system. There's 150 years of history, and that's unusual.
In New York's Hudson Valley sit the remains of an iconic destination that helped shape American culture.
I was part of the fourth generation of my family to be here. There's probably nothing in my life that makes me more proud.
We're near the Catskill Mountains. It's about 80 miles north of New York City, an area of natural beauty. We're talking forests, mountains, and waterfalls.
Just south of the small town of Ellenville, a number of abandoned structures stand out among the wilderness.
The buildings are kind of a mishmash, as if they were built at different times without much of a master plan.
What I first noticed is this huge tower must be 10 stories tall. This is something you'd expect to see in the big city, not in the middle of nowhere.
Dotted around are various sports facilities, tennis court, playing fields, even an old ski slope. Whoever built this place really had some money.
Vestiges of the high life lie in the very spot they were left.
You can see shelves with ice skates still on them and even tickets strewn on the floor. It feels like it's frozen in time.
But before being reclaimed by nature, this place was a hotbed of talent.
It was like you've gone to this Shangri-La for comedians and professional athletes. But people make places. And without the people, it didn't have the wherewithal to survive.
These crumbling structures in the Catskill Mountains were once a go-to destination for New York's movers and shakers. Keith Rubenstein's family were one of many who flocked here to escape the city.
We came here twice a year for probably 15 years of my life, and it was just something that we look forward to, and it was ingrained as part of our fabric as a family.
This is the Nevele. At its peak, this was one of the grandest resorts in the region, but it came from very humble beginnings. It all started when David Slutsky's great-grandparents moved to New York from Russia.
They tried to do some farming. It probably proved to be not too productive. They realized that they could rent out space in their own home to people that wanted to come here for the summer.
But the Slutsky family home was getting crowded, and a regular patron asked to build his own bungalow on the property.
My grandfather said to this man, I have a better idea. I'll build a bungalow and it won't cost you anything. And then when you come up in the summer with your family, you'll pay the rent.
Mr. Slutsky had tapped into a growing market that would bring guests to his door for years to come, thanks to New York's booming immigrant Jewish population.
They needed someplace to go on vacation. They needed to get out of the city. These were the days before air conditioning.
But in America, anti-Semitism was rife, and discrimination was protected by the law.
And many hotels had signs up that said no Jews allowed or Gentiles only. It was a really dark period of American history.
This gave birth to something called the Jewish Vacation Guide, which actually highlighted areas that would welcome Jews, many of these in the Catskills.
Across the region, places like the Nevele provided a getaway for those turned away elsewhere. As Jewish vacationers flocked to the area, it soon became known as the Borscht Belt.
The nickname came from the beet soup, borscht, which is popular across Eastern Europe, an area where many of these Jewish immigrants came from.
As New York's Jewish population became more prosperous, places like the Nevele evolved to cater to their needs. And their demand for entertainment would lead to a cultural revolution sparked in the resort's theaters.
Borscht Belt was really the incubator of some of the biggest comedy stars of the last century. Their style became known as Borscht Belt humor.
They also mainstream a certain type of Jewish American culture. In the 1950s, Yiddish was this strange language that some immigrants spoke. By the 1980s, everybody knew words like klutz and schmuck and chutzpah.
Almost every major Jewish comedian of the era performed in the Borscht Belt.
Lenny Bruce, Joan Rivers, Sid Caesar, the list is almost endless.
Eventually, this kind of Borscht Belt Jewish humor became American humor.
As a kid, I remember seeing comedians that were probably too inappropriate for me to have seen, like a gentleman like Buddy Hackett, was known for his irreverent humor.
The groundbreaking entertainment led to a surge in popularity, which would make the Nevele a cultural institution.
If you want to get an idea of what the Nevele was like in its heyday, you can watch the movie Dirty Dancing. The resort in the movie was actually based on hotels in the Borscht Belt.
Guests at the Nevele could even expect to rub shoulders with some of the biggest sports stars of the day.
John McEnroe, Billie Jean King, and the like used to come here and play against each other.
But in the summer of 1966, the Nevele would welcome the biggest A-lister of all.
We got a call that President Johnson needed a place to stay because he wanted to come to the area to dedicate the new Ellenville Hospital.
The president needed a place to stay with his entourage of over 100 people, and the Nevele was the only place big enough to accommodate them all.
The Nevele was already fully booked for the summer, But the Slutskys weren't about to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
We had to call everybody who was supposed to come for that night and ask them to please delay their stay or their arrival one day.
While most guests were willing to change their plans, one man named Mr. Sugarman would put the entire presidential visit in jeopardy.
As a surprise to us, that man had called the White House. The White House called us and indicated that if we couldn't provide Mr. Sugarman with his room, then President was not coming.
Unbeknown to the Slutskys, the disgruntled guest was a member of the Democratic Party who was coming to stay at the hotel for his honeymoon.
So the reservation was honored, and President Johnson stayed at the Nevele as planned.
On the front page of the New York Times, heading read, "Johnson saves a Catskill honeymoon."
But despite this feather in their cap, difficult times lay ahead. The Nevele was at the heart of the Borscht Belt, upstate New York's Jewish vacation hotspot. But a travel revolution was about to bring the entire region to its knees.
In the second half of the 20th century, airfare really decreases in price. And so it becomes trendy to go explore the world and not just spend all your time on one resort's property.
Over the years, guest numbers dwindled, and as it entered the 21st century, the Nevele started to fall into disrepair.
I used to bring my kids when they were little just for a night so they could see it. And it was in a really bad state of deterioration. All of the things that were great about it were memories.
On July 4th, 2009, the Nevele shut its doors permanently. And for over a decade since, the site has sat abandoned. Today, developer Keith Rubenstein is bringing the site back to life by turning it into a destination wellness resort.
I think the wilderness, the landscape, and the nature is the star of the show. You have the ability to hike, enjoy the fresh air. I think we have the makings of a world-class project.
In northern Colorado, a cluster of oddly shaped structures marks the point where a global conflict reached the heart of the nation.
It landed in April of 1945. It was right on the corner, right over there. It's kind of a sobering thought when you think about it.
We are in Timnath, Colorado, a small town at the base of the Rocky Mountains, about an hour's drive north of Denver.
An unusual site sits tucked away beneath a busy highway.
At first glance, this looks like a scrapyard. There's rusting metal and old machinery everywhere you look.
But a collection of strange metal beasts stands out among the clutter.
What's striking here is that there are just so many of these structures in this place, and it must have taken years to make.
These sculptures stem from the wild imagination of a man who would go down as a Colorado legend.
To look at this site today, you would never imagine that a foreign power would attack the location, but that is exactly what happened here.
Among the big box stores and fast food chains, this rusting metal menagerie seems at odds with its surroundings. Ken Sweats knows firsthand how much this place has changed throughout the years.
My grandparents moved here in 1942. This was all farm ground as far as you could look.
But in 1945, this peaceful farm, almost 1,000 miles from any ocean, would become the unlikely site of one of World War II's most bizarre offensives.
My uncle was in this general area sometime during middle of the day, I believe. He heard a loud boom and a flash of light. Not knowing what was going on, he ran back to my grandfather's house, and my dad said that he was white as a sheet.
8-year-old Jack Sweats had just witnessed a last-ditch attempt to turn the tide of the war by one of America's desperate foes.
Japan came up with a plan to weaponize the jet stream. And that plan would involve balloons that could be released in Japan and would be carried all the way across the breadth of the Pacific Ocean, and that they would come down then in the Pacific Northwest.
Over 9,000 of these hydrogen-filled paper balloons were released between November 1944 and April 1945. Each contained several incendiary bombs, as well as one larger high explosive.
Upon release, a timing device would carefully calculate the way that the balloon progressed. It would manage its maximum height and its minimum height.
The balloons would reach the U.S. after 3 or 4 days, and having lost most of their hydrogen, begin to sink.
It would come down somewhere from Oregon all the way over to maybe Michigan, and that somewhere in there it will find a forest and set it on fire. The Japanese hoped if we could start thousands of fires, maybe it would so cripple the United States that it would greatly complicate the war effort for them.
The ultimate goal was to spread fear and anxiety amongst the American population. They were essentially weapons of terror.
Adding to the fear and confusion, as soon as they dropped the bombs, the balloons were designed to disappear without a trace.
The Timnath incident seems to be an excellent case of a balloon bomb that did everything it was supposed to. What Jack Swett saw that day was a balloon bomb that came down. It dropped its high explosive bomb, which was the first explosion. And then the self-destruct sequence began as the balloon began its rapid ascent. And the flash of light in the sky that he saw was 11 pounds of thermite consuming what was left of the balloon envelope.
My dad had mentioned that immediately, of course, the government was here. They wanted to shut down any public knowledge about what had happened.
Since the government was suppressing any news of the explosions, the balloon bombs didn't spread anxiety and terror as intended. The ban on reporting also led the Japanese to believe that the balloons hadn't really had any effect and the project was deemed a failure.
Once the war was over, the Swetts family looked forward to a bright future and would go on to turn this place into something no one could have imagined. The Swetts family farm in rural Colorado was the site of a rare Japanese balloon bomb attack during World War II, but it would soon gain notoriety for an entirely different reason.
My grandfather had started to advance in age and had some health-related issues. So my father took the farm over in 1975.
Ken's father, Bill Swetts, would run the farm with his wife, Sandy, and they would have 3 boys of their own. But soon, tense times would lead him down an unexpected path.
My dad was a volunteer fireman. He always kind of had trouble like winding down, especially if he'd get a call late at night. So he kind of started just tinkering around in his shop, just kind of started building stuff.
As time went by, he was making larger and larger pieces, and that turned into this sculpture garden.
My dad and my mom were talking, and my dad looked around and he says, "This kind of looks like a zoo around here."
This is Swettsville Zoo. Here, at the site of the balloon bomb attack, Bill Swetts would introduce the world to his unique creations.
These all started as just pieces laying in a big pile. Like for instance, this is off the front end of a car. This is off a farm implement. If you look up there, that's actually an oil pan.
Swettsville Zoo became a destination for local residents, and it also attracted folks on road trips from around the globe.
As the zoo's popularity grew, Bill always insisted on one thing.
It was important to my dad, and it meant a lot to him to be able to share it with people. You know, he always wanted to keep it free.
Bill's zoo was hugely popular with locals and people passing through town. But an unexpected event would mean his farm's days would be numbered.
1995, my mother was diagnosed with hepatitis that she contracted from a blood transfusion back in the 70s. The doctors gave her less than a year to live.
Ken's father, Bill, made the decision to retire from farming so he could spend more time with his wife, Sandy. They traveled the country together, and Sandy would beat all expectations and live for another 14 years. She passed away in 2010.
Since 2010, Timnath's population has grown more than tenfold. Timnath is essentially becoming a suburb of Fort Collins, and it's no longer the sleepy farming community that Bill Sweats grew up in.
This urban sprawl would soon put the zoo at risk.
The development that's encroaching is one of the reasons that my dad has decided to leave.
In 2022, Bill Sweats sold the farm, and the zoo closed its doors for good. Bill Sweats' land has been purchased by a development group that plans to turn it into a new community. Development principal Liz Newman is making sure the zoo's sculptures have a home here.
Sweatsville Zoo has been so important to this community for decades, and we don't want it to go away just because we're developing it. We want to preserve the heritage.
There's fascinating links to history that you wouldn't expect in this place. I think it's so great that this sculpture garden is going to be preserved.